Okay, let's just dive right in. Have you ever felt like you're stuck? Caught in the exact same frustrating loop, whether it's at your job, in your relationships, or maybe even just inside your own head? Well, today, we're going to unpack a really powerful way of thinking that can totally change how you see those problems and, more importantly, how you might actually solve them. It's all about learning to see the hidden patterns that really shape our world.
Does this one sound familiar? I think we've all been there. Your boss is driving you crazy, your partner just doesn't seem to get it, the team isn't pulling its weight. Our very first instinct, almost always, is to point a finger. We get stuck thinking, if I could just fix that one person, that one broken part, everything would finally be okay.
And this is the question that changes absolutely everything. It's the pivot point. It's where we go from blaming an individual to zooming out and looking at the whole context. Systemic thinking asks us to stop looking for a villain in the story and start looking for the invisible script that maybe everyone is following without even realizing it. Now, to really get this shift, we have to look at our default setting first. See, most of us were trained to think in straight lines. We tell ourselves these really simple stories that have a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. And in those stories, every single problem has a single, easy-to-identify cause.
This is what's known as linear causality. Event A causes event B. Simple. It's kind of like a detective story, right? We're looking for that one clue, that one culprit that solves the entire case. The only problem is human interactions are almost never that simple. This whole model just assumes that B has zero influence back on A, which, let's be honest, is almost never true in real life.
So, let's try something different. Let's move away from that straight line and start thinking in a circle. The systemic perspective asks us to stop staring at isolated events and instead start seeing how everything is connected in this dynamic, ongoing loop. It's a total 180-degree change in perspective. And you can see the difference so clearly here. Over on the left, you've got that one-way arrow of linear thinking. A causes B. It's a one-way street, end of story. But look at the right side, with circular causality. Whoa. Now you see a feedback loop. A affects B, sure, but then B's reaction circles all the way back around to affect A, which then affects B again, and on it goes. The focus completely shifts from the individual parts to the relationship between them.
I love this metaphor because it just nails the core idea. Think about it. If you're watching two people dancing badly, you could blame one of them for stepping on the other's toes. Or you could look at how they're moving together, or maybe failing to. Systemic thinking says, forget about the individual dancers for a second and focus on the dance itself. The rhythm, the flow, the pattern of interaction that the two of them have created. All right, you might want to take a breath here because this next concept is where things get really, really interesting and a little mind-bending. It challenges the very idea of an objective reality and suggests that, in a really profound way, we are actively creating the world we experience. This is the big reveal.
This quote is from the physicist Heinz von Foerster, and it's just so powerful. It's at the very heart of an idea called radical constructivism. Now, this doesn't mean the physical world isn't real. Of course it is. But what it does mean is that the meaning we get from it is something we create, not something we just passively receive.
Let's break this down to make it super simple. First-order reality is just the facts, the objective stuff. It's raining outside, the meeting is scheduled for 2 p.m. These are things most of us can agree on. But second-order reality, that's our subjective interpretation. That's the story we tell ourselves about the facts. Is the rain a cozy day to stay inside or a ruined picnic? Is that meeting a huge opportunity or a complete waste of time? That's our invention.
And this is the crucial takeaway here. Our feelings, our actions, they aren't based on the objective facts of the world, but on the subjective meaning we give those facts. This is exactly why two people can go through the exact same event and have completely different reactions. It's because they're living in different second-order realities. They're reacting to two completely different stories.
Okay, so if we're all living in our own constructed realities, that brings up a massive question, doesn't it? How in the world do you create change? If you can't change the objective facts, you have to find a way to change the story. And the systemic answer is, you can't force it. You have to work with the system, not against it. It's about a nudge, not a push.
Now, there's a pretty complex-sounding word for this, autopoiesis. But don't worry about the term. The idea is what's important. It just means self-creating. Think of a living cell in your body. It's constantly working to maintain and reproduce its own structure. Well, human systems, like families or teams at work, they're kind of similar. They're self-regulating, they have their own internal logic,
and you can't just reach in from the outside and control them directly. So, if you can't force it, how do you influence a self-regulating system? You don't push it, you nudge it. You perturb it. You introduce something new that disrupts that old stable pattern. For instance, imagine that team meeting where one person is always complaining. The linear approach would be to tell them to stop being so negative. The systemic nudge? Ask a totally unexpected question like, what's just one thing that would have to happen for this problem to feel slightly less annoying? See? That question totally disrupts the complaint pattern and forces the system to reorganize itself around a new idea. This is a classic line from the anthropologist Gregory Bateson, and it's perfect. That unexpected question in the meeting, that's a difference that makes a difference. It's a new piece of information, a difference, that is meaningful enough to the system that it actually makes a difference. It's a piece of data that doesn't fit the old story, and that forces the system to adapt and maybe create a new one. So how do you actually do that in a practical way? Well, sometimes the best thing you can do is just to get out of your own head and all those endless verbal loops. Things like drawing, for example, can introduce new, nonverbal information. It can bypass our usual, rigid ways of thinking and create a space for totally new perspectives to just show up. Wow, okay, so we have covered a lot of ground, from simple blame games all the way to the nature of reality itself. But let's bring it all back home. What does this all mean for you, right now? How can you actually apply this way of thinking to break the cycles you might be stuck in?
Here it is. This is your practical guide. First, just consciously make the decision to stop looking for one person to blame. Instead, zoom out. Look for the recurring pattern, the dance. Then, try to identify the feedback loops that keep that pattern going. And finally, instead of trying to fix the whole thing at once, just look for one small place where you can introduce a tiny but meaningful change, a difference that might just make all the difference.
And that really brings us to the final question I want to leave you with. Think about a frustrating loop in your own life. Instead of focusing on the other dancer, what's one small change you could make to your own step? What pattern, big or small, could you start to change right now, today?